So now moving on to another story. And this has to deal with a story from 538, a reliable source, right, guys?
Of course.
I mean, they never get anything wrong, people.
Never.
Don't worry about it. Don't panic. But I have a very interesting article, and you can check out all our articles in the show notes. Who the Democrats in the early primary states don't want to see nominated. So, the article starts off. The still very crowded Democratic presidential primary has been polled pretty extensively this year, giving observers a sense of who's doing well in their efforts to win over likely Democratic primary voters and caucus goers, and who is having a hard time gaining traction. And the polls have been shifting gradually over the last few months. Former Vice President Joe Biden retains his first place. Okay. While Senator Elizabeth Warren continues to make a slow and steady progress, and Senator Bernie Sanders has slipped somewhat. Boy, are they not paying attention. They are really not doing their jobs. Although he has maintained support in the mid-teens for some time. So, I basically want to continue on. So, in a field this large, we have turned to asking people who don't want who they don't want the Democratic nominee to be. One of us, Mascot, has been doing this as part of his early state activist interviews since April, and other, Peterson, including this question in a recent survey he conducted with Iowa State University civics, among which the Iowa Democratic Caucus goers. Peterson is planning to ask the question again in follow-up surveys. To be sure, our approaches measure different things. The preferences of a few dozen party activists aren't necessarily the same as those of several hundred caucus goers, but we have found some similar patterns. Obviously, Sanders is backed by an enthusiastic set of supporters, but we've also found that he has a substantial number of detractors in the party. Huh, really? In Mascot's August early state activist interviews, 59% of the activists, 17 of 29 people interviewed, said they did not want him to be the nominee, compared with 21%, 6 people, who said they would consider supporting him. Only Miramar, Florida Mayor Wayne Messam, and Representative Tulsi Gabbard earned worse marks, 62%. Hold on. You're going to hear their two names again very soon. For instance, in the Iowa State University Civics poll, Sanders has struggled to win over new supporters among those who didn't back him in 2016. Less than 1% want to see him become the nominee in 2020, and a third specifically do not want to see him nominated. Of course, that doesn't mean Sanders cannot win the nomination. President Trump was arguably a factional candidate for much of the 2016 cycle, but it does mean Sanders' potential growth is limited. Another candidate with a substantial number of detractors is Biden. That's right. Even though he sits still in the near top of the polls, he was the #1 candidate who likely Democratic voters said they did not want to see as a nominee. Now, granted, this was not anywhere close to the percentages who said they didn't want to see Messam, Gabbard, or Sanders nominated. Curiouser and curiouser. It's almost like they want to mention Tulsi Gabbard and Senator Sanders in the same message altogether. But it's still quite given high, given how many activists also said they were still considering Biden, 34%, or 10 people. It may be harder to think of Biden as a factional candidate than Sanders, given that Biden also enjoys significant support among a broad swath of Democratic voters within the party, including the majority of African-American voters. Now, again, I got to take a step back. Recently, I saw a few articles saying that the Biden campaign just spent almost close to $950,000 of their campaign funds on private jets. I'm hearing reports of Biden and his campaign struggling to have people attend his events, and also that he's canceling some events because, like I've said before, the more Biden speaks, the more people are sick and tired of him. He has the Hillary Clinton problem. Plus, let's look at the last 4 debates. Really, take a good long look at them. And I don't care what your opinion is on Biden, but I mean, you know, the guy did a piss poor job. And to say that he is the front runner calls a lot of things into question, especially how people are collecting information and data. It's almost like they're choosing to ignore Senator Bernie Sanders and at the same time compare him to Representative Tulsi Gabbard. They want to do all these negative smears. Just to be, okay, so just again as a final note too, because I know I want to get Paul and Daniel on this, the article goes on to say that, you know, they still need to collect more data and information, but I think it's just corporate propaganda. I screwed that up. Propaganda. Hey, looks like we got a new word, folks. We're live.
It's the new, if you want to redo everything, propaganda sounds better, so they're going to use it just like energy exploration instead of oil drilling.
Yeah,
wonderful thing. So I think that this is very interesting. So we've talked before in our show previously. Was it yesterday we were talking about polls?
Yeah.
Long poll day.
We talk about polls.
We talk about polls a lot. But that polls are really being used as a weapon. The means of a poll is to say, I'm going to make people think a certain way about something. And so if you go into, again, let's just do a really quick, just back-of-the-envelope calculation on polling. So about 40% of Americans are actually registered to vote. Of that 40%, 30% are Democrats, other 30% Republican, 40% independent. So 30% are Democrats. So of that 40% of that 30%, probably half, maybe around half, have landlines. Let's not even break it down any further, because you can break it down further and say, because they're going to break it down by, hey, did you vote in the last 3 elections? You know, they want to go back before Bernie Sanders so they can, pick who their people are a little bit quicker. So if you do that, when you read these polls and you really think about it, these polls are like representing what? 12% of the country, what they think? Something like that, 10%, 20%, 5%. If it's anywhere near that, it makes no difference. Polls are being used as a means to make people think what other people's consensuses are. So you can have Joe Biden do really well in the polls, but no one attends his campaigns or no one attends his rallies. So what does that look like? Why does Joe Biden have such a large black vote on paper? Well, I would say Joe Biden's supporters are people that really don't pay that much attention to politics. And they're like, well, I know Joe, I know Obama, that's pretty good. And Joe seems to be the guy that the news is telling me is going to win. Now, that really only matters for Joe when he gets to South Carolina. Doesn't matter all that much in Iowa. Doesn't matter all that much in New Hampshire. And he doesn't even have much support with Latinos. That's actually Bernie Sanders, which is why Latinos are never mentioned as a voting bloc in this election, because Bernie Sanders has a commanding control on that. Right. So Joe Biden, here's what we expect to play out. Here's what our...
Are you saying that Joe Biden has, or is perceived to have, good support among minority voters because of his campaigning in the Carolinas?
No. I'm saying he's perceived to have good polling because the people that they're polling are people that just like generally watch news and they're like, well, I know him because it's like people that are...
It's name recognition.
I hate to use the term low information voter because I think it's doesn't have the right connotation. But my point is that I expect that Biden doesn't win in Iowa or New Hampshire or Nevada. Those people that were supporting him, the black vote that supposedly he has in his pocket, just vanish and go to someone else.
Right. So there's a couple other things, too. We need to take a step back and look. You know, Biden is still being propped up by the corporate media. Biden is still their fan favorite. But when you look at his rallies, compare that to Bernie. We just covered it just earlier in the show. Look at his event or his coverage of. Oh, I almost screwed that up. Look at that rally that he did in New York. Can Biden pull that off? No, he can't. So we got to remember that anything that corporate media writes about Biden is ridiculous. But I want to hand it over to Paul.
I just want to say one thing super quick before that. That I was a caucus. I was at the last Iowa caucus. I was covering it. You know what doesn't do well for Biden, even if he has high poll numbers? Caucuses are about enthusiasm. How many people you can get to take 4 or 5 hours of their day to go in a room and be told to sit and stand and not leave. That doesn't sound like any Biden supporter. You know who that does sound like? Bernie Sanders.
Bernie supporters. Well, now, is this a Nate Silver article? I know it's 538. We didn't print the actual author of it, but it's totally in line with 538 style of reporting. And I had immediate issues with the way this article was written. From the get-go, when it talks about there being a top tier of candidates, it just got done talking about, you know, the recent moves in the polls for Biden, for Warren, and for Sanders. So it's implied by that phrase, a top tier of candidates, is those three. However, if you click the link to that, it is literally another article on his own website basically arguing that it's not really a top three, it's really a top two, because he's not relevant. Bernie sucks. Everyone hates Bernie, right? Duh.
No.
And this is the disingenuous way that you can twist and turn polling statistics to your own ends. And it appears to be what 538 does repeatedly. Nate Silver doesn't strike me as someone with a robust understanding of political movements, ideologies, history. He strikes me, I mean, he's the math guy, right? Like, he's the sports numbers and politics voting numbers guy. And he's
the math guy with the quotation marks.
Right, quotation marks. He did great in 2008. He predicted every single state accurately.
But he's been riding that thing like a fucking
And he
jackass.
has been riding that thing. He's been riding that wave. And we're at a point now where the way he's been analyzing it is apparently not effective anymore. He is missing the mark completely. And you're right about pointing out the enthusiasm gap, because not only do you need to be there at a caucus for 4 hours and stand and sit at attention, you also need to be vigilant at the officials who have a history of being a little bit sly and a little loose with the rules in terms of counting things.
Because you know what?
The candidate who has the enthusiastic supporters comes out on top there.
Right, because I just can't help at a time when you, Paul, me, Eric, and Laney went to see Jimmy Dore when he was here in Chicago. And, it was a great comedy show, but he also showed a video of how the primary was being run in 2016. Now, you had one of the election judges writing on his hand the number of votes and screwing up royally, especially when it came down to the final vote. We got to get involved in this election cycle, because if we continue to listen to people like Nate Silver, 538, Washington Post, New York Times, look, these were once reputable sources of information. Let's be very clear about that. But the bias is in. The hatred towards Senator Bernie Sanders is in, and towards all progressives, because just imagine all the attacks that are happening towards Andrew Yang, Representative Tulsi Gabbard, Senator Bernie Sanders. Think about what's going to happen to all the progressive candidates that are running for congressional seats for 2020. Daniel, what's the final word?
So I want to remind everyone that in 2018, all the establishment candidates on the Democratic side more or less underperformed in their polling. All the progressive candidates in 2018 more or less all exceeded their polling. And I think that we're talking underperformed with establishment by like 2 or 3 points, and then overperformed with Democrats by 4 or 5 points. So the metrics are already showing them to be wrong. Now, let me ask you guys this, watching. You know what? It's even more amazing than watching all the pollsters in the Democratic Party completely mess up Trump being... I mean, like, I don't mean to toot our own horn, but, like, we all knew about 6 months out that there was a pretty decent chance that Trump was going to win. I got
in so many arguments, man.
Yeah, we lost friendships because we were like, hey, look, this is what we're showing. This is what makes sense. It's going to happen.
I'll be honest, I was not as confident. I thought there was definitely a chance. I thought people were overconfident in Clinton, but to be honest, it's sites like 538 that were reporting day of 90% chance Clinton's gonna win. I'm like,
98.
boy,
right?
It is hard to argue with. That's a very authoritative voice. And I've been caught in this before, and I urge everyone else to not get caught in this. Do not abdicate your faculties. The line of reasoning that there must be something that these professional, number-crunching journalists know that I don't. I'm digging everywhere to find what's the golden nugget of knowledge that they seem to have that I'm missing. It's not there.
Yeah.
It's literally, you know what they have that most people don't have? The perception of having it. That's all that they have is that perception.
Okay, so we do got to move on to another key story, but I just want to add this final note, and maybe something, Daniel, we can work on this. But maybe we should talk about our time in Philly and what we saw there, and how we both made our own conclusions. Because I know you had your own perspective, I had my own perspective. Walking out of that Wells Fargo Center, I basically realized that there's a good chance Clinton's going to lose. And when I shared that information with some of my friends and family members, it was like, you're wrong. But we'll talk about it another time.
I'm going to say really quick, just to wrap up my point.
Yeah.
And this is an evolved form of Jimmy Dore's point. How is it that the three of us, a number of other people on the team, Jimmy Dore, a few other people,
Nico House, Tim Black, Lee Camp,
can more successfully predict election outcomes in our spare time than these guys who make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year doing it? How is it that even Paul, you were saying that you weren't sure, but you thought there was like if you were to put a number on that, would you say like 30%? 30% that you thought he would win? Trump?
Yeah.
Just 30%. That's still better than any other news organization in the entire country. Right. How is it that we're able to do that? How is it that we're able to predict that these candidates are going to win. Yeah, it's
Right.
it's a sham. They don't have it right.